Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another of Natecla Scotland's monthly online forums. Tonight's forum is entitled, a fantastic title, ESOL is not enough, making space or spaces for informal learning in and by wider communities. And we're really delighted to have a long-term colleague of ours facilitate tonight's session, Carol Goodey. Welcome, Carol. Carol is currently an associate tutor at the University of Glasgow and has worked in ESOL for at least the last 15 years. And actually, I have a lot to owe Carol if it wasn't for a very inspiring chat we had a way back 6-7 years ago about starting Natecla Scotland. There wouldn't be a Natecla Scotland. So double thanks, Carol. Thank you. As you know, it helps everybody if you keep muted throughout the session. We are recording. You're very welcome to anonymise yourself if you wish. Carol has designed this evening to be interactive, so you're very welcome to post comments in the chat, put your hand up to ask questions, and there is time at the end to chat to Carol and ask questions as well. As I said, we are recording and this will be shared on our YouTube channel, and I'll share that link with you in the chat box. So enough from me, and let's hand over to our excellent speaker this evening. Carol, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pauline, for this introduction, and thanks all everyone for coming along. This isn't moving. There. Yeah, so in this session, I'm going to be considering the value of informal learning for integration and how we can make space for this by working with others. So I'll be talking a bit about the context, different aspects of the context, so how I'm understanding integration, barriers, and so on. I'll talk a bit about informal learning, and then I'll share the practical example of a local community project, and then talk about what we learned, and then give some suggestions and things to think about as I go. So what we mean by integration. So it's quite a contentious term, and different ways of understanding it. So it can be thought of as assimilation. So where newcomers are expected to adopt the language, customs, and values of their new countries. Difference is seen as being disruptive, and so the aim is to reduce differences by having everyone speak the one language, doing the same things, holding the same values. Multiculturalism, where differences between groups are recognized and valued, which is good, of course, but then there can also be potential for friction between groups. We often see integration described as a two-way process in policy, which recognizes that there needs to be adaptation by both the arriving communities and the receiving communities. Or we could see it as an intercultural process. So this is how a recent report on the New Scots refugee integration strategy understands integration as a multilateral, multimodal, intercultural, and dynamic process. So it expands on the idea of integration as a two-way process and argues that we should move away from seeing integration as assimilation and look and see instead integration as a restorative process occurring in local communities. So this, I think, is what we should be aiming for. So it's not a case of people learning English and citizenship, because it's not as straightforward as that. For one thing, people coming to the UK come to quite a hostile environment, where the UK government are intent on creating an increasingly hostile environment for people. The term came from a 2012 interview when the then Home Secretary Theresa May said that the aim is to create here in Britain a hostile environment for everyone, so that people choose to leave the country voluntarily. So with Brexit, the Nationality and Borders Act, and the introduction of even more immigration legislation. The UK government are ramping up their hostility towards people, and policies like this significantly undermine the integration processes. The media also hinders integration and creates a climate of fear around immigration by portraying it in negative and incomplete ways. We're unfortunately very used to seeing headlines and front pages like this. These ones are taken from the website Tomorrow's Papers, and they show migration as a crisis, migrants as dangerous, and yeah, they pit migrants against other groups in the UK. Sorry, my voice. And over the last few years, there's also been a really worrying increase in far-right extremism, targeting different groups as well as migrants. Sorry, my voice. But they're being, excuse me, they're being increasingly vocal and public in their demonstrations of hate, fueled by government rhetoric and the media. And Kirsten Forkert and fellow researchers have suggested that this repeated vilification of asylum seekers and all migrants creates an amplifying loop of stigmatization, a kind of rumor mill that spreads suspicion and unease throughout society. So this unease has been clear in my conversations with many different non-ESOL groups. I currently work, as Pauline mentioned, most of the time now as an associate tutor at the University of Glasgow. And although I was still doing some ESOL up until quite recently. And before that, I worked in a local authority in Scotland in a few different roles, but a lot of the time I was adult literacies and ESOL worker in a rural area of Perthshire. So in that role and in my other roles in community development and equalities, I worked with different groups, with ESOL learners, but also with adult literacies learners who mostly spoke English as a first language, people with learning disabilities and community groups. In the conversations we had, people were expressing a lack of confidence about talking to speakers of other languages. There was a wariness and a nervousness about having to interact with people if those people were from another country or spoke another language. And there was also a feeling that newcomers to the area were getting better services than those who'd lived there for longer. So there was a sense of us and them. And in the ESOL groups, we talked about people's experiences of living here, and people talked about the difficulties connecting with people in the wider communities. In one group, they said that Scottish people are very friendly, but they don't take us into their groups. So over the years, I've heard similar things from different learners and groups. And similarly, research with migrant workers in another rural part of Scotland found that despite the friendliness of local people, they didn't engage in social activities with local communities. And research with Syrian refugees in Ireland also highlighted similar experiences. People are friendly, but there was very little social mixing among Syrians and local people. So not only is there a hostile environment for speakers of other languages and a climate of fear and unease being generated, but people are also limited in their opportunities to connect with the wider communities and to get to know each other. So even though it's now recognized in policy that integration is at least a two-way process, policy and funding usually only target people who are speakers of other languages. The burden is on them to integrate against the odds. And so with so much keeping people apart, we need more than ESOL learners improving their English to bring people together and for them to feel more part of their communities. So ESOLs may be not enough. We also need opportunities for learning by other people in the wider communities that would support integration processes and share the burden. But also these opportunities are limited. And this kind of learning would ideally happen informally as people meet and spend time with each other, rather than in a formal setting where they learn about people rather than with them. So informal learning is another one of those terms that can mean different things to different people, and it's often defined by what it's not. It's not formal learning, not formal education. So formality and informality in learning is most usefully understood as a continuum. At the one end, the most formal learning or formal education is associated with educational institutions that are accredited to deliver qualifications, and where learning takes place in instructor-led classrooms with a preset curriculum. And then moving to the other end of the continuum, learning is increasingly informal, from organized informal learning, often referred to as non-formal learning, to everyday informal learning, such as self-directed learning, incidental learning, and tacit learning. So the learning we do as we go about our lives without the intention of learning, and often without realizing that we're learning. So the term non-formal tends to be used to describe communities-based provision. And it's useful to think of formality and informality on the continuum, because some community-based provision will be more formal than others, depending on their approaches they take. And the continuum also helps us avoid a polarization between the two terms, so that we don't tend to see one as better than the other, but recognize that there'll be elements of formal and informal in most learning situations, away from the most informal end of the continuum. But formal learning does tend to have higher status than informal learning. Formal learning is what's valued, is what can be controlled and accounted for. And informal, non-formal learning are often seen as being for people who are not quite ready for formal learning. And the hope and the aim is that they progress into formal education. But all that we need to know can't be taught. So informal learning is important, not just as a precursor to formal education. And this is often better understood in workplace learning. And there's a lot more research in that field about informal learning at work, where people learn the job and learn the language while working. And Evan Frendo highlighted this in his IATEFL plenary, which is worth a watch if you get a chance. So we generally know that we learn informally, and know that informal learning is important, but as Frank Caulfield suggests, the significance of informal learning is recognized, then promptly forgotten and rediscovered years later, when policymakers, researchers, and practitioners admit again to the importance of informal learning before proceeding to develop policy in theory and practice without further reference to it. So informal learning is often invisible, and we're often not aware of what we learn informally. As ESOL practitioners, we ourselves will not be aware of the skills and the knowledge we have developed through our work with speakers of other languages and the systems we work in. A lot of the language, also a lot of language is learned informally and implicitly in context through interactions. But again, because of lack of connections with wider communities, the learning can be restricted for many. So I think it's important that we focus on informal learning, not only for language development, but also for people in the wider communities. Many are already learning about migrants informally through what they read in the newspapers, in their social media bubbles, and what they learn is likely to be inaccurate and incomplete. So it's important to think about how we can learn, how we can offer wider learning opportunities for people. Because as the OECD report on integration found, the more that people actually interact with newcomers, the more likely they are to consider immigration as an opportunity for their country rather than a problem. So that seems like valuable learning. So summing up very briefly, the contexts that most of us are likely to be working in, there's a climate of fear and unease in communities. There are limited opportunities for people to get together, and this isn't helped by community centres and libraries closing down and funding cuts. Integration is not about assimilation, but is an intercultural process where people come to feel welcome and as if they belong in a place. And informal learning is important, whether we ourselves work in a formal or non-formal context. So that's the context. So now I'll look at the practical example, the local community project we developed with these elements in mind. So working with non-ESOL colleagues, we developed a local cultural connections project, which we described as a community learning and development project designed to bring people together, reduce barriers, maximize participation, celebrate diversity, build relationships, increase confidence, and create learning opportunities. So the idea was sparked when I went along to an adult learners awards ceremony with 3 groups of my learners. So I went with a group of ESOL learners, a group of adult literacies learners, and then people with learning disabilities, and usually kept apart in different groups and different provision. This was a chance for them to get together around the same table. And then when the Ceilidh started to dance together, teaching or learning the dances from each other. So it's a really good way to break down barriers. And so I wanted to see if we could explore this more and build on that. So I got in touch with my colleagues, and most of them were happy to be involved with the project, but this project was mainly developed with a community learning development colleague working in youth services at the time, Pam Armstrong. So we got funding for a pilot project. So working quite closely with the learners who'd sparked the idea, we organised the first of 4 social events, the Ceilidh. So we were based in a community campus, so in the same building as a school and recreation centre and library. So we hired the assembly room as the venue. We hired a Ceilidh band, and then we set about getting people to come. So we put a lot of work into promoting it to as many people as we could, from different groups, working with people we knew, contacting key employers, using our contacts in the community and other organisations, as well as word of mouth and the usual press releases and posters. And we got a good turnout and a good mix of people from different countries and the more established local community. But getting people there was only the first step. So it wasn't enough to have people in the same room. What was important to us in this project was not only putting on the events and leaving things to chance, but also thinking about getting people mixing. So enjoying people's company, each other's company, and having fun together. Sunday night, we had the live Ceilidh band with a caller, and the caller was a great guy and talented musician, and he made sure everyone knew how to do the dances, talking us through each one. For those who might not be able to understand the instructions in English, or people like me who can't follow instructions, there were enough people in the room who knew how to do the dances and could guide others. So as many Ceilidh dances require people to dance with new people as the dance progresses, and people work together to make sure everyone's going in the right direction. There was a lot of mixing. The first dance was one where everybody started in a big circle. I can't remember what it's called. And everyone was encouraged to get up, not forced, and to take part, but that worked really well to break the ice at the beginning. So tables were set, so tables of 8 were set up around the room, and different groups were encouraged to sit together and chat. So people were welcomed when they came in, helped feel comfortable, and introduced to others at the tables. We collected feedback at the end of the evening, and people could give written or oral feedback in English or another language. And it was all very positive. People enjoyed the evening and getting to know new people and they were keen to have more opportunities to come together. So one woman talked about having waited for this evening for 4 years. And we also asked people what other activities they'd like to do, and the feedback informed the next 3 events of the pilot phase. So the next event was a World Food Night, which linked in with the initiative, an initiative by Refugee Action. And there were more opportunities for people to use and develop their language and communication skills, and to learn more about each other. So a lot of people who had come to the Ceilidh came along to this too, as well as new people, because we continued to promote each event. So for this event, interaction and connection were facilitated in a few different ways. So in the ESOL sessions before the food night, we prepared by thinking about the kinds of questions that could be asked, possible responses, how they might start conversations, and questions they could ask of other people. And on the night, we had what we called conversation coasters. So I've got a blurry picture, but I can find it. Conversation coasters, and these coasters were just laminated cards that you could turn over, and there was just a simple question to prompt conversation. Also, everyone was invited to share a favorite recipe, and these were brought together in a Cultural Connections recipe book. And again, this could be in any language, which was then translated for the book. So a very low-key publication, but a positive shared experience and something everyone could be part of. And then donations were collected for Refugee Action. So the third event was a singing workshop led by someone who came along to the Ceilidh. And then the final event of this pilot stage was a beetle drive. And this is a great simple social game. It's quite popular in Scotland, but not everybody will be familiar with it. So essentially, the idea is that sitting in small groups, people race to draw a beetle, but can only add each part if they roll the corresponding number on the dice. So you have to roll a 6 to start with. And after you've got the body, if you roll a 4, you can add a wing. If you roll a 3, you can add one of the legs. But you can't add the eyes until you've rolled a 5 for the head. So when somebody completes their beetle, they shout beetle, and that's the game over for the whole room. And everyone adds up their score by counting how many body parts they've managed to draw. And then the highest scorer at each table moves to the next table in one direction, and the lowest scorer moves in the other direction. So we used pictures to explain the game, had people who could explain different languages, and we monitored it during the first round just to make sure everybody knew what they were doing. So it's very visual, and not much language is required to take part. So although we realized that having the paper and the pens on the table when people were coming in could be off-putting. So one woman who wasn't yet literate in her own language or in English started to walk out when she saw it, but she was encouraged to stay with her 2 boys, and they all seemed to have a good time. So we monitored and helped out when needed. One woman found it difficult to add up her score at the end of each round, so we made sure we were on hand to lend a hand when needed. So people were sitting at tables of 4. So again, people started with people they know and were comfortable with. But as the game gets going, they move to other tables. So the highest scorer moving in one direction, the lowest in the other, and the other 2 staying put. So people mix as the game progresses, seeing familiar faces from the previous events and meeting new people. And some people did seem to be wary about moving at first to sit with new people that they might not be able to communicate with, but soon relaxed and enjoyed being in the company of new people. And as they moved around, they shared a bit of their language. Mostly I have to say hello, goodbye, count to 6, the numbers on the dice. So there was a lot of laughter, even though there wasn't a lot of shared language. And we had token prizes for each round, then a prize for the overall round. And then we had a prize for all the children. We gave a prize for all the children. So we created categories to suit. So the cutest beetle, or the beetles that look most like a robot, and things like that. So the feedback from the pilot project as a whole was also very positive. So people found the events particularly valuable for bringing people together. So as I mentioned, we also had a singing workshop that was offered by one of the participants who attended the Ceilidh. And there weren't as many people at that workshop, and Pam and I didn't feel confident enough either to join in. But participants had the opportunity to sing songs in Scots and Gaelic was new to all participants, so everybody was learning together at the same time. And following the evaluation of the first 4 events, the project moved on to more sustainable, longer-term activities, working with a wider range of partners. So these included group walks with the local countryside ranger, photography workshops with a community learning and development youth worker. And we also continued to organise the bigger events, so Ceilidhs and beetle drives. Ceilidhs when we had money to pay for the band, and beetle drives don't cost very much to put on. And there was also a very popular conversation cafe where people of different ages, backgrounds and nationalities came together, continuing to learn about, with and from each other. So the cafe took place weekly to start with. And then we started a second one in the evenings to fit around people's work. Workers from other services were welcome to come along to these cafes, but as participants rather than with an agenda. So often workers will want to come to a group, say their bit, tick their box, but not engage much more than that. And that happened once in an early cafe, and it really changed how change the relationships and who people could be in the interaction. So moving from active participants to passive recipients of information or a service. So we didn't allow that. So there's no pre-set agenda, but rather the agenda was set by those who came along, emphasizing that people were there as equal participants and that what they had to say and contribute had value. To begin with, whenever the conversation sort of needed a refresh, we used our conversation coasters again. So they were usually set out on the tables and could be picked up easily when needed. We had name labels for everyone so people could remember each other's names each week. And there was tea, coffee and biscuits. So the first time somebody came to the cafe, we would make them a cup of tea or coffee, welcome them, make a bit of a fuss. But then after that, everyone made their own or made for each other. And this was to foster a sense that they weren't guests, not recipients of a service, but active participants and all contributing. So at all times, the focus was on equal participation of all. So when my colleagues and I were paid workers, all the participants were on equal footing. We didn't have some who were volunteers, while others were migrants or disadvantaged people, people with learning disabilities, mental health issues, or older people, or whichever label can be used to make us feel good about helping them. So it was recognized that all participants had something to gain and something to contribute. And I think this is important to consider the power in these situations and to think about how people are being positioned. So some weeks we'd have quite a few people, around 20 people. Other times it might be a smaller number, around 6, but both worked well. And it was also a really useful way to complement ESOL provision in the area. So I was the only ESOL worker in this area. And if I couldn't accommodate someone in the ESOL groups currently running, they could always come to the cafe. So it's open to anyone to come along if they wanted. So people who took part in the events and the cafe talked about feeling closer to their community. Now, when they walked along the street, they were more likely to see someone they knew to say hello to. People were much more comfortable with each other and talked about improving their communication skills. They felt better about themselves and developed confidence to go and try other things in the wider communities. So the main things we realized from this project were that people really enjoy meeting new people, but often don't get the chance to. They also really seem to enjoy meeting people that they wouldn't normally get to spend time with. And not only did this project bring together newcomers to the area with longer term residents, it also brought together people of different ages, people of different social classes, different abilities, and they weren't being kept apart by services who are funded to work with a particular category of people or fix a certain problem. So people who had been nervous about talking to speakers of other languages thoroughly enjoyed meeting people from other countries and being able to have fun together in a way in which everyone could participate. So it was very valuable. But sadly, however, with fewer community space and not as many opportunities to meet up with others, there's often, as participants said in the study, looking at integration through conversation clubs, there's nowhere to go, not many chances to meet people, nowhere to go and talk to people. Oops. So we also learned that valuable learning occurs when people come together. So people new to the area learn more about their local services and traditions and picked up some Scots, as well as improving their English language through interaction. People learned about other languages too, and had the opportunity to hear other languages being spoken between participants, sometimes if they were helping each other to communicate with the wider group or when they were having conversations with each other. And as Alison Phipps and fellow researchers have suggested, framing integration as multilingual allows for the presence of languages in communities. And this can reduce the fear of speakers of other languages and also encourage learning of other languages. So people were also learning about each other. And one man at a later Ceilidh expressed surprise at how people from other countries were participating, joining in the dances and enjoying themselves. And he'd probably only known a single story about migrants as people to be feared or to feel sorry for. And he was starting to see them more as people like him who could have fun. So in her TED Talk in 2009, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie talked about the danger of a single story, of only having limited information about groups of people, and how this makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult, and emphasizes how we're different rather than how we were similar. So as people were coming together, they had the opportunity to see people as people and hear more stories. Everyone learned a bit about each other and their different experiences across place and time. In the cafe, we discussed issues of relevance to the people in the room. Some of the topics covered are ones that are not usually present in published language teaching materials. And these are some of the broad topics that came up. So the learning objectives of more formal educational settings, such as language or citizenship classes, were being achieved informally as people got to know each other. And in the conversations, people were motivated to understand and be understood. So Jacques Rancière wrote in his book, The Ignorant Schoolmaster, all their effort, all their exploration is strained towards this. Someone has addressed words to them that they want to recognize and respond to, not as students or as learned individuals, but as people, in the way you respond to someone speaking to you and not to someone examining you under the sign of equality. So this is important to our learners, to be seen as equals in interactions, not as people who are not yet ready to participate in wider communities. And they were also contributing and supporting each other. And this is also the case for other groups of people who are usually in this position of getting help or being targeted or seen as a problem to be fixed. So adult literacy learners, for example, who are often themselves a marginalized and stigmatized group whose knowledge and experience is often not seen and valued. So, but people were able to share their own knowledge of local customs, services and languages, and felt good about themselves. So in their feedback of the cafe, people recognized that they were improving their English through their interactions with different people, learning new phrases. From people who'd lived in the area longer, we heard that they were developing their skills and feeling more confident talking to people from other countries and learning from those interactions about language, food, customs, but mostly that people from other countries are not to be feared as they might have been led to believe. So this kind of learning is important. Participants in the study of Syrian refugees in Ireland said they wanted to mix more with Irish people and wanted to know that they were good people, that they weren't different, they didn't want to kill them, but they were there because they wanted a safe place to live. We learned more about the value of collaboration. So facilitating this wider informal learning is made possible by working across teams, organizations and communities. So collaboration is important, but it's not always easy. And there can be a lot of luck and trial and error involved in finding people to work with that you trust. And you have to be on the lookout for opportunities and ways in which priorities of different partners might overlap. As an example of this, there's a recently published plan outlining the Scottish Government's strategy to tackle social isolation and loneliness and build stronger social connections. And this could provide a way not only to access funding for this kind of work, but also to find common cause with other services and organizations and provide a route to making connections with other communities. So the plan is a wee bit vague, as they often are, but with its focus on breaking down barriers to connections, it could be a way to justify working with others across shared goals. Another possibility is the place standard tool that I mentioned earlier. Did I? Oh no, I was going to mention it earlier. So if you don't already know about it, it's worth a look to think about and discuss local issues with ESOL learners. So it's increasingly being used in local authorities in Scotland, and it could possibly be a way to connect to wider conversations and to identify priorities for change. It could also be a good starting point for the more participatory approaches that people like Mike Chick has been writing about recently, and to move away from the more linear synthetic syllabus of course books, which is at odds with what we know about how people acquire second languages. But just as a quick overview, it provides a really simple framework to structure conversations around 14 different topics. So covering both social and physical aspects of a place. People are asked to rate each aspect on a scale of 1 to 7 and then give reasons for that. That's a really good way of prompting conversation. Because it's been used by different organizations and sectors, it provides a consistency that allows to work across sectors more easily. There's newer versions now as well, so to have conversations with young people or with children. And there's also a climate lens now where you can look at more environmental issues locally. It allows for world-centered education, moving away from learner-centered education. So there's more scope to think about what people's learning is for in the world, with a focus on social and environmental justice issues. It's very much the start of the process, not the end, but it helps identify what learners find most important and gives a sense of what they might be motivated in to take action in. And it's colourful, which might be frivolous, but I've used the tool with quite a lot of different groups, and when you bring out this colourful wheel diagram, there's definitely a buzz in the group, so it feels fun and people always enjoy the conversations. So I'd like to talk about that a bit more, but there's probably not time. So getting back to collaboration, so working with others gives much more access to different contacts and the good relationships that they have already built up with people and organizations. So it's important to be able to connect with people who are not already supportive or not already interested in meeting people from other countries. So at times we did have to do a bit of coaxing to get people to come and for them to invite their friends, reassuring them that they would feel comfortable and that they would make a valuable contribution. So when people are wary or not sure about mixing with people they perceive as being different from them, they can need a lot of encouragement. They often need to feel personally invited and welcomed rather than finding out about something through a poster or Facebook post. So people they already know and trust are better placed to do that. So learners asking their friends and colleagues, workers asking the people they support, and so on. But also working together develops awareness and confidence in a wider group of workers. So this is important because a lack of knowledge and confidence and understanding of people from other countries can keep people apart. Speakers of other languages can be left to ESOL provision and specific support organizations for them to do whatever magic they're thought to do. So ESOL is often a mystery to people outside of it. And in my experience, it's very common for practitioners to be asked how we do what we do and if we speak all the different languages of our learners. So my colleague Pam, for example, hadn't had experience of working with speakers of other languages before the pilot project. And this is how she described how she felt at the beginning of the project. She said she was nervous about talking with people from other countries. She was scared she wouldn't understand them or they wouldn't understand her. And she recognizes just how much she's learned from others and the impact that learning has had on her practice. So as people involved in language education, we all know how crucial language learning is for people who've come to live in a country with a different language to them. And much of our focus in our practice and research is often focused on that aspect of helping people to feel more part of the communities they now live in. And we also know how important ESOL is for social connections and support. But even as we talk and write about the importance of ESOL and the related vocational and employability skills, we're often aware that it's not enough. So when I was at the always a very good NATECLA Scotland conference in Dundee in November, 2 or 3 of the sessions I went to touched on how despite really good work resulting in people developing language and skills, they still face barriers. And this is something we also see in research studies around ESOL and integration. So for example, research with refugees in Wales found that even those refugee research participants who had relatively high levels of English language fluency had struggled to find work. They cite a similar study that found that language proficiency to have significant but not sufficient impact on the rates of refugee employment. And they suggest that while linguistic proficiency undoubtedly affects refugees' success in obtaining employment, it's only part of the picture. So when people step out of the ESOL bubbles to access services, employment, and the wider community, it often doesn't matter how good their English is or how skilled they are, the barriers remain because they're often the only ones who've learned and adapted. So we need to shift the focus a bit and we need more people to be involved, more people to be learning with, from, and about each other. And we need to create spaces for this. So working with others, we can use the skills, knowledge, and experience that we have gained as ESOL practitioners. So skills that we are often not aware of until we work with someone who hasn't yet developed those skills. In particular for this kind of work, our communication, our facilitation skills, our contacts, and our comfort working with people from different countries, even though we don't speak all the languages. So there's value not only for our ESOL learners, but for people in the wider community who find that they enjoy meeting new people, learning new things, and helping others where they can, but often don't get the opportunity and don't recognize the opportunity that immigration from other countries can be. So I've talked a lot about informal learning here, and I just want to emphasize that we can't plan the learning itself. So we need to be comfortable with that, but it is possible to plan for the conditions conducive for fostering it and to make space for informal learning. And as Peter Jarvis, John Holford and Colin Griffin have written, learning always has this vital dimension of creativity and unpredictability. When we start to learn something, we never know exactly where the process will take us. So that can be scary and challenging, but it's also quite exciting and interesting, I think. So I think we need to, as Griff Foley has urged us, to break out of the straitjacket which identifies adult education and learning with institutionalized provision and course taking, and work together to create spaces for informal learning where people can be more fully who they are, equals and contributors, learning through participation and interaction with others. And that's all I'm going to say. There's a list of things I've referred to throughout the session, and there's my contact details. So I'm always happy to chat about this. If anybody has any questions they think about after the session, feel free to get in touch. But yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.
Carol, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. You've given me a lot to think about, actually, and a lot of ideas to take away, which is always phenomenal. So thank you for that. We do have some time now, everybody. So we have 10 minutes. If anybody has any comments or particular questions about what Carol has spoken about this evening, you're very welcome to pop it into the chat, and I can read it out for you, or unmute yourself and ask Carol some questions. So I'm opening the floor to anybody out there. It's very quiet. Sheena, hi.
Oh no, I was just coming on video, wasn't it? But I just would like to say I really enjoyed your talk, Carol. That was fascinating, and I can only imagine how much work you must have had to put in, because starting that from ground level, where you're trying to bring people together and make them feel comfortable, it's a tremendous amount of work to do it. But what you've said has given me just loads of ideas. I think you were saying, Pauline, in the chat there, about just the coasters for starting conversations, a little thing like that. But you know, Akeli, we've done some things with sort of world food and so forth, and getting people together. But it's the mix of people, I think, is the key to what you're saying. Getting people, not just our ESOL classes, but bringing people in and mixing and so forth. I think, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I think that's important. Like, so we have had people who've seen what we did and tried to replicate it, but they didn't involve the ESOL workers. So they were doing it from a non-ESOL thing. So they didn't involve the ESOL workers. So they had it the other way around. So they had a lot of local people and didn't have it the other way. So I think it's, to use everybody's contacts works well to get people coming along, because people do need encouragement. I can
imagine, just to be comfortable with it.
There's a good question. I wondered how you advertise the events in order to get as many old Scots to come along. That's a great way to describe natives.
So that's kind of what I was saying. So we used our contacts and their contacts We contact, so I worked in a community campus, and I was working alongside other community workers. So I was the only ESOL worker, but there was other community learning development workers. We had contacts with, like social work places, employers and things like that. So like I say, people often need to feel invited to something like this, that it is for them, or otherwise they're not sure what they're getting into. So we really just kept talking to people and kept asking them, and just thinking about people to say, do you know people to come along? So we also advertised it. So we put posters up, we put it on Facebook. We put it in the local press, so the local press releases. We also have like local publications in the local areas, and we put it in that. So they were free things that get sent around all the doors, and people that usually tends to get people. People see things in that. So we just tried everything, because it isn't easy.
Yeah,
It
isn't easy.
It isn't a matter of just putting it on and hoping people will come. So yeah, so it is. Yeah, I think it's just, that's why I think it's important to make connections with other services and other organizations.
I think as well, in time, it's one of those things. You have to, even if you start small, you just have to have faith and keep going, and don't allow maybe your first or second events of small numbers, but just to keep the momentum going and to encourage people to bring their friends or to share the word, and then you'll have more warm bodies, for want of a better expression, as time goes on. You just need to keep, I always believe, need to keep running good quality events that people want to come to, and the momentum will build from there.
Yeah, and word of mouth for the next one. Yeah, you're right. I did see an article in the paper probably a month or two ago, and it was a person who had contact with the local asylum seekers and had made contact with them, and she's a member of a church. So together with the church, they had organized a ceilidh. So there's sort of, that's a way as well of getting people mixing, probably, and people the thing, and that sounded like it was really successful.
Great.
So
do you have another question for you, Carol? Does getting people to get exposed to, experience or practice other languages other than English have any role to play to empower them in that way?
So just getting people exposed to I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, but
Hi, Martin.
Can I just explain?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I was just, obviously, I mean, the main, or one of the main focuses of this would be to help migrants with their English, but I'm just wondering if, because, if all of the interactions in English, they're kind of automatically at a bit of a disadvantage linguistically. I'm just wondering if you had a moment where, how do we say this in your language? Can you share a bit of your language with us and put you in a position of being the authority and having your own knowledge to spread, as opposed to just kind of taking it from us? I wonder if that is something that
happened quite a bit, because like you say, there was that sort of equal feeling, so that there was participants and people could talk to each other in their own language as well as part of the cafe, so people could just hear that happening. So, but yeah, there was often people were saying, how do you say this in this language, and how to say that, or and we got people tried it out. So so it's putting people at a disadvantage. During the Beetle Drive, there was a lot of sharing of language, so it was about all like saying, how do you say hello, like when people moved around, and how do you count to, like my colleague Pam learned how to count to 6 in Polish and things, and she was really chuffed with that. And so it did give, so they're not just learners, they're people who speak another language. And
and I mean, they have their own capital, they have their own, and to give them the chance to to demonstrate that as well, you know,
Yeah,
make everyone in
yeah.
the room a bit more empathetic as well, but put them in the position of being a learner of Kurdish just for a few seconds, even, you know, to realize what a struggle it is, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Carol.
Yeah, pleasure.
That's great. Oh, thank you so much, Martin. Does anybody have any last questions or comments they'd like to add? You're welcome to do it into the chat box, or unmute yourself and speak to us directly, whatever you prefer. I don't think there is anything going to come, and we are just coming up for 8 o'clock. Carol, so what I'll do is we'll just tidy up and finish 5 minutes early. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Carol for joining us this evening and sharing what I think is a really interesting perspective on your topic tonight. And I'm really interested about your the ideas and the projects that you've shared with us this evening. There's lots of really good chats in the chat box, obviously. A huge thank you to everybody else for joining us as well. And hopefully we will see you at another NETECLA Scotland event soon. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.